Hi, yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. And thank you all for joining us today and welcoming our great alumni panel. My name's Ani. I'm a senior and I am majoring in psychology and minoring in business institutions. I'm excited to welcome our panel today. We have a great lineup. And like Cassie mentioned, we will hear for them for about 40 minutes. And then the last 15 minutes, we'll have an open session where people can ask questions. If you want to turn on your mic, you can do that and ask questions, or you can submit it on the chat and we can call on you, or you can send it privately to Cassie and then she can say the question for you. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome our panel. We can start in alphabetical order. So Julio, would you like to introduce yourself, tell us what you studied and what you're doing now?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. My name is Julio Severio. I am the Chief Investment Officer at a private equity real estate company called Bridge 33 Capital. Before that, I've been there about 4 years. In my job, I run everything that is capital related to the company. So that means investing, buying deals. And for us, that means buying individual properties or some other strange opportunities that we chase sometimes, either in loans or bonds or other things like that. I also focus on selling those things that we buy. And then I also focus on financing those things that we own as well. So all of that falls kind of under my team in the investments group at our company. I've been here about 4 years. And before that, I was at a money manager called PIMCO in their alternatives group. And I focused mostly on real estate and real estate related transactions. I worked for a private equity fund at PIMCO as well as a hedge fund while I was at PIMCO. And before that, I was on Wall Street. I worked at Lehman Brothers when I first graduated out of Northwestern. I worked at Morgan Stanley, and then I had short stints at Barclays and Jefferies at various points in time during the financial crisis, which I'm happy to discuss with anyone at any later point. Very strange and weird experience. At Northwestern, I was an economics major. I had a minor in, or I had a dual major in legal studies, I think. It was like a secondary major at the time. And then I had a minor in business institutions.
Thank you. And Kelly, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Kelly Meisner. I'm the Vice President of ESG and Sustainability at Ventas. We are a publicly traded healthcare REIT based in Chicago. We own about 1,300 properties across the US, Canada, and the UK, primarily consisting of seniors housing communities. We're one of the largest owners of seniors housing, medical office buildings, and research and innovation buildings. I've been at the company for almost 12 years. I started off doing acquisitions and I did asset management for a few years. And then we created a dedicated sustainability position, which was something that I was really interested in and passionate about. And so I lead all of our corporate ESG and sustainability functions. We recently set a goal to achieve net zero operational carbon by 2040, which is a whole other panel, which I'm super excited about. And jumping back, I went to business school after Northwestern, after doing consulting, management consulting, and at Northwestern, I was pre-med and obviously did not go to med school. That's a whole other story too. But I started off in biomedical engineering, decided I didn't really want to do engineering after, of course, taking all the engineering analysis classes. I switched to straight biology and also did economics. So I was a bio-econ dual major.
Thank you, Kelly. And Lauren, would you like to go next?
Good morning, everyone. Lauren Lowry with FP Commercial Real Estate. I am a boutique real estate brokerage that specializes in commercial retail on the East Coast and the Midwest of the United States. We specialize specifically in urban corridor retail development and representation. So I represent retail centers. I represent tenants. So restaurants and Dunkin' Donuts, all those people. It's really easy to figure out what I do for a living. All the things that you go to every day, every retail mall you go to, I tend to represent either the retailer or the retail mall itself. And I also invest in commercial retail in urban corridors. I was in tech, which I believe is called McCormick now. I've been out of school for some time. My business is celebrating 30 years of business this year. And even though I'm 21, so I was in tech and then sort of evolved into sort of a tech American studies sort of program. So I'm focused on assisting and being creating values in urban corridors.
Thanks, Lauren. And Whitney.
Hi, glad to be here today. I'm Whitney Salinas. I'm a partner at Simpson Thatcher in New York. Simpson Thatcher is a large, global law firm. I run our real estate financing practice in the U.S. I represent almost exclusively private equity firms on the sponsor side, representing them in their large real estate financing transactions of their owned real estate and portfolio companies that specialize in operating real estate space. I've been at Simpson for about 15 years now, ever since I graduated law school. I went to law school after graduating from Northwestern in 2006. I majored in history and political science.
Thank you, everyone, for your introductions. It's really interesting hearing how real estate can manifest in so many different ways. So we can start off with Julio in alphabetical order. And can you share a little bit with us some important classes or classes that you think held a great impact and how that fostered into your career?
Yeah, it's just as someone that went into a finance career path, obviously Northwestern, the undergraduate program doesn't offer a lot of finance heavy courses. So I think, after graduation and kind of entering the field, I'd say my first inclination was to feel like there weren't that many classes that felt like they actually translated directly into the, the practitioner side of what I was doing. I think upon looking back, like later in my career now and thinking about like the impacts of some of those classes, I'd say that the more well-rounded experienced classes that you can have, the more that it ultimately ends up translating to being useful for your actual job. And you may not realize it 1 to 2 years out of school, but I think you realize it maybe as I coming up on 20 years, like it starts to feel like that stuff was more impactful. So like the way of thinking about solving problems. And so I would, of course, like obviously you're gonna take whatever classes you need to for your majors, but the more that you can try to dabble in, and it's not just one class. I'm sure undergrads still probably feel the same way I did too. But like if you take one class in something, like you don't necessarily feel like you really understood the subject matter. You feel like you learn the material for the sake of getting a good grade in the class and not necessarily letting it really kind of, soak in. And so I'd say the more that you could find, another sort of topic that is of interest to you and makes you think differently. So if you're like a history or poli-sci, major and, you can dabble in some form of math class or stats class or something along those lines. It's just a different way of thinking and you can take 2 or 3 classes in that field. I would say like that would seem really practical to me as far as like being able to then translate it to, a career path. As I mentioned, my majors were economics and then this legal studies major, which allowed me to take some poli science and history classes too. And so I felt like I had a good mix of those two. And again, I didn't feel like they were, I can't point to any individual class and say that was the class that made or break, that make or break a career or made me feel like I really understood the subject matter in my first year out of college. But again, looking back, I think trying to at least explore a couple different disciplines is probably the best route.
Yeah, thank you for that. Kelly, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Julio said. I mean, I don't know that there's like a direct connect. I mean, there wasn't a sustainability anything when I was at Northwestern around the same time as Julio, it sounds like. But I think learning how to problem solve, learning how to think critically, learning how to write, that's kind of core liberal arts education. So, and I think a lot of my classes contributed to that. I remember, I really enjoyed one of my genetics classes, which again, I'm not doing genetics now, but the problem solving and critical thinking from that class translates to any job in the day-to-day. So yeah, I would just add that.
Yeah, thank you. Lauren, would you like to go next?
Sure, I would again echo both Kelly and Julio's comments. I had a really interesting sort of class situation at Northwestern. When I arrived, I wanted to major in urban and regional planning. No one told me that they discontinued the major the minute I arrived at Northwestern University. So I had to pivot. And of course, everyone was directing me to civil engineering. So I took a lot of time taking thermodynamics, things like that, that don't really relate to what my intended career was going to be. I ended up kind of creating a major that sort of mimicked urban and regional planning. So I combined civil, industrial engineering, and then urban economics, and sort of created what we thought was going to be sort of a shot to urban regional planning. But if I were you all, and I think I just recently saw that, I was probably for 10 years vice president of the Northwestern Black Alumni Association. So I am fairly familiar with things that were happening on campus over the last, few years or so. And I think that there were opportunities for undergraduates to take classes at Kellogg. And if I were to give you any advice, it would be to figure out what they're doing over there. I think they have a real estate sort of practice as well there somewhat. So I would just see what they're doing over there at Kellogg. It was always a mystery to me when I was a young person what was going on over there. But now that I know, I should have spent more time. So do that.
Thank you. And now handing it off to Whitney.
Yeah, I mean, I think I totally agree with what the other panelists said. I also think the other thing I'd add too is take what interests you. I think there's a lot of, thought and pressure put into taking classes that might propel you to a certain career. But I think as Kelly explained, and I think a lot of us on this panel are showing, we didn't take real estate classes or we didn't take financing classes, but when you take things that interest you and you kind of really are able to dive in and learn how to critically think, how to disseminate information, how to be creative and problem solve, those are the skill sets probably all of us use the most every day. And sometimes when you take things that have, are just really interesting, like some of the classes I took the most and really interesting were Chinese history classes. Obviously I don't use that subject matter ever in my career, but they really allowed me to become an expert in something, learn how to be interested, research more. And those are the skills we all use every day. So I would just also encourage everyone to take the things that they really are interested in, because that's what's awesome about college and school in general. You get to learn all these things. And I think all of us wish sometimes we got to do that every day.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hear it's very reassuring hearing that, and that you are encouraging dipping your toes in different areas and really expanding your perspectives and just becoming more of a critical thinker, which we can then advocate for ourselves when we're in interviews or in different job positions, and talk about how our holistic experience at Northwestern gives us that edge. So now we can switch the order and go backwards. So Whitney, I'm going to start with you. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, what was your first job right out of college, and how did that translate throughout your career? Or what did you learn from that job, and how did you pivot into where you are now?
Yeah. So right out of undergrad, I went to law school. So I guess that was sort of like my first job, but then obviously working at a law firm, and I've actually been at Simpson Thacher my entire career, which is probably unique for most people to spend, their entire career at one place. But I think, what I learned so much, like after leaving Northwestern and going to law school, is that, a lot of the skill sets that are really important and that you learn aren't even just the actual substance that you're doing every day, but they're how to be confident, how to speak clearly, how to ask questions. And I think it really surprised me how much those pieces that are like the soft skills were important to ultimately being successful in a career. And so I think that's how I think about it.
Lauren, would you like to go next?
Sure. So my first job out of Northwestern was at Goldman Sachs company, which is very, very, very different than what I do today. They're an investment firm. I enjoyed every minute of working in that environment, which was really fun and aggressive. And but yeah, I did learn that again, real estate touches every we live on the earth, so certainly real estate touches every industry in some capacity. There's a real estate deal in almost everything that you do, and you don't even realize it. So I learned a lot there. Again, I think where the money is, where the money's going. I feel like you should absolutely find a minute to work in a major investment firm. Doesn't hurt, and it was just it was a great experience. It did prepare me a little bit because I think networking and relationships are critical wherever you are in the world. And certainly with a major international company like Goldman Sachs, you can meet a lot of great people who can assist you in the future when you want to do your own thing, which is what I did. And they were all very helpful.
And yeah, I think I'm next, so I can just jump in here. So my first job out of undergrad of Northwestern was working at Deloitte Consulting in their strategy and operations consulting branch. And yeah, I like I said, I was pre-med and I was still thinking I might go to med school at that point. So it was consulting is a great job for anyone who doesn't quite know what they want to do. It helped me just kind of learn basic, like how to work at a company, basic business skills. It was really, I went to business school after that, which was where I figured out that I wanted to do real estate, and then ultimately came into sustainability within real estate. But yeah, I think echoing what Lauren said, I think investment banking and consulting are great things if you're not exactly sure what you want to do or don't want to kind of pigeonhole yourself into a particular industry. They're great kind of learning and training grounds for figuring out your career from there.
Yeah, I also started my career like Lauren. It's in the big financial sector. I started at Lehman. However, unlike Lauren, I didn't enjoy every minute. I'd say I only enjoyed a small fraction of those minutes because it was a lot of minutes, honestly. But it was good. Like Lauren and Kelly both said, it was a great experience. I learned a lot of broad, skills. I learned how to, operate in a professional setting. I learned, moments where you have to, try to take the reins of whether it's a situation, opportunity, meeting, whatever it may be. Other times where you need to take a back seat, and you need to like stumble through some of it. It's not dissimilar to, the way I kind of phrase it is like you to grow in your career, you kind of need to have these opportunities of taking risk, and you need to do it in sort of like low risk settings. So like at first you need to take risk when like there's not really that much like danger, right? It's like learning to ride a bike. It's like at first maybe your parent, like there's training wheels, right? So there's no risk. Then the next is like your parents are there to kind of balance you. Then the next is like, well, no one's there. Then the next is you're out on the street. And so being in a big setting is like the safe way of kind of learning these things. Because the worst thing that happens is someone comes, some senior person comes over the top and kind of saves the day. Like if you're out starting your own company and you're 22, 23 years old, like, and you swing and miss, like it may mean your company's over. So you kind of, it's good to learn some of these experiences before you actually set out to do whatever sort of venture you want. I think that's what Kelly was describing about. her first job and then business school. Whitney said the same thing about law school, followed by the big company. So I think, a lot of us have followed that path, and there's a reason why. It's kind of like the, tried and tested sort of way of doing things. Like all four of us have we did the exact, not exact same path, but very similar paths. And whether you stay at a big organization like Whitney and find your kind of niche, or whether you end up going somewhere smaller like I have done, and you can kind of figure it out from there. But there's a reason why that path makes a lot of sense for people.
Yeah, thank you so much. And now I want to jump back to one of Lauren's point in networking. So do you have any advice on how to network and how to navigate those relationships? We can start off with Julio and then work our way back.
Sure. I think my view is it's always best done organically. So what I mean by that is like utilizing opportunities that happen in the normal course of whether it's business or encounters or whatever it may be. And then networking doesn't have to be this really awkward, like I don't know if even post-COVID you guys do networking events anymore, but like we used to do them when I was like coming out of undergrad, and like the job fairs. I mean, those were the worst things ever. Like forced conversation with people you have nothing in common with. It's terrible. But like, I think the better opportunity is like, having a discussion with someone that you have some commonality with, whether it's work related, whether it's a project you're working on, whatever it may be. And then like having an additional follow-up conversation, or just asking one follow-up question, like that's networking too. So it's building a personal rapport. It's building a personal connectivity that's one level deeper than whatever that transaction level conversation was. That, to me, is really important networking, because you have the bond over the commonality or the common experience of that one thing you focused on together. And then you can add like a layer of complexity on top of it. And that relationship for me has always held firmer and better than that, speed dating, 20-second interaction, shaking hands. So to me, that would be like the way don't get me wrong, the speed dating stuff matters to some degree too, and you're going to have to do it and it's going to be terrible. But the other part is like way more valuable. I'd really put an emphasis on that.
I think I'm next, so I'll jump in. Yeah, I would echo a lot of that. Be networking, sort of the cold call networking type stuff has never been my forte or something I really enjoyed. And I agree, like trying to get a layer deeper, and I think with any sort of networking that you're doing, you have to be really pointed about what are you trying to get out of this interaction. Not in that it's so self-centered necessarily, but like how can you be helpful to that person, and how specifically can they be helpful to you? I get a lot of people reaching out to me, and I try to respond, as much as I can, but sometimes things get buried in the inbox. But the ones where someone's asking a very specific question or has something specific that I can help them with, that's where I think it can be the most valuable on both sides. And I don't think you don't have to have a connection to get an opportunity or a job, right? So, I mean, the people that I most recently hired on my team, like they didn't have any connection here. Like they came in, they interviewed, they demonstrated that they could do the job, which isn't to say that you don't need to network, but you can also stand on your credentials and go through kind of the normal job process. It's not like everyone getting a job has some sort of connection.
So I have a little bit of a different take on this. I think almost everything that I've seen so far in my deal-making world in real estate, in Chicago, in Florida, and in Atlanta, are all based on relationships. These deals do not get done unless somebody knew somebody, someone introduced somebody, or someone said they can actually complete this deal. So I'm going to say that you're going to have to really think of yourself as an actor in certain situations. I'm not always comfortable, speaking to people I don't know or interacting with people. I was never that kind of person. My mother's a second grade school teacher. My sister is a librarian. So we're very quiet people, but you have to really become more demonstrative in the environment in which there are people there who you should meet. You get out of your comfort zone, say hello. I think what Kelly was saying is offer something that you can do to help. You can do something, you can add some value to some of these people who you're meeting, but go out of your way and say hello. I did not take advantage of that in the best way possible when I was an undergraduate. And because no one told me this is something I should be doing, where other classmates were, you know, all over everybody all the time, you know, every job, every person who came in, every professor who knows 20 people who you should probably know too. You know, you really have to go out of your way and just bite the bullet, become an actor, just jump outside of yourself and honestly attack relationships as best you can. That's my advice.
Yeah, I love all the advice everyone gave. The two things I'd add is one, I think in the real estate industry, like obviously it's a huge industry, but sometimes it feels really small and you come across the same firms and the same repeat players. And so sometimes networking with people who you might not think in a moment of time in your career are the most important to where you want to be next become really valuable resources and relationships later in your career. So engaging with people who may not do the exact same thing with you or may not sit across the table from you in a negotiation, but may ultimately be in the industry and seeking out their advice or, you know, just forming a relationship, asking about the career, you know, may come back 10 years later to be a really valuable relationship you've made. The second piece of advice I'd make too is obviously when you're starting out, there's a lot of other people starting out too, and getting to know those other people at other, you know, financial institutions. Like people grow up and become senior at different places, and sometimes your strongest connections are people you met when you were right out of school, and you know, you meet somebody in a peer space and you're just talking about, you know, like Julio's late nights on Wall Street, and you're kind of commiserating about the good and commiserating about the bad and celebrating the wins. And those people become senior at places too. And then you form these relationships with really senior people. And so I would just encourage you also to not forget the people who might not seem like they have a lot to offer at a moment in time, but maybe later connections in your career.
Thank you so much. The next question hints on something Julio mentioned earlier, how networking kind of changed after COVID. Could you talk about how the pandemic impacted your career and industry and how you navigate that? We can start with you, Whitney, and then work our way back.
I mean, I think like everyone, it was obviously a huge change. I live in New York City, so the early days were crazy. Obviously in the real estate industry, there was a whole kind of, I don't know, it was crazy what was going on. I represent a lot of private equity sponsors in the hospitality world, and their hotels were closing. A lot of different things were going on, and we're all just trying to figure it out. Obviously, we all pivoted to working remotely, and we're able to. Here at Simpson Thacher, we're back in the office 3 days a week with the option to work 2 days remotely on Monday and Friday. I do think being in the office is pretty key to our business and to business generally. It's an opportunity to connect with people, to learn, to form relationships. Sometimes being in the room with somebody and hearing what they say on a call, as opposed to just being on the other side of a computer, can add a lot of value and lead to like connections. So it obviously changed a lot of what we do. And I think it's great, the flexibility we've able to, you know, still utilize. And I love it sometimes, being able to work from home in my sweatpants every once in a while. But I do think it also taught us the importance of what we have when we're together.
Kelly, would you like to go next?
Is that me? I'm sorry. Is it? Sorry, guys. So how did the pandemic impact my life and career? Yeah, the pandemic is very serious and continues to be a very serious situation for the commercial retail sector. So if the office sector, which I don't work primarily in, but do some work in occasionally if I have to, if the office sector is vacant and hospitality is vacant, so if no one's coming to the hotels, if no one's going to the restaurants, if there are no conferences, etc., and who is going to visit the store on the first floor of that building? So downtown Chicago right now is somewhat in a crisis because the retail has not come back. But other areas of the United States may have sort of a different take. But it was very impactful. Real estate didn't stop. I didn't stop my work. Real estate was one of those sectors that suggested that you didn't have to stop working. We still had to get out on the earth and make deals, show properties, etc. But it is still impacting sort of what I do day to day. Now, luckily, since I work in sort of urban corridors, it became an opportunity as an investor. So all of a sudden, we had a lot of things happen in urban corridors, by the way, because there was also a social justice crisis in the United States during that time. So we had a lot of things going on, a lot of investors looking to liquidate properties. And when you see, I learned this from the 2008 financial crisis, is that, I should have purchased everything in Florida in 2008. Didn't do it. A lot of people lost a lot of money, but money was there to be made. So now I should have purchased everything that came into my direction in 2008. I purchased everything I could find in 2020 and 2021. So, there's a give and take there. So there's opportunities to become sort of a unique real estate practitioner.
I can jump in. So I was at Ventas during the pandemic, and it was absolutely a crisis for the seniors housing industry. The seniors in our communities, they had to quarantine often. They had to sort of lock down. They couldn't have visitors. They couldn't do shared meals like they were used to. It was difficult in a lot of places. New admissions were on hold. The operators were, trying to figure out testing protocols and quarantine protocols. On our medical office side, our medical office buildings were generally able to stay open, but they didn't have patients coming in. We have doctors and dentist offices in those buildings, and they were trying to figure out their viability, our tenants for their long term, what was going to happen with them, and everyone just didn't know what was going on. So sustainability took a bit of a backseat during all that craziness for the first few months while we were just trying to figure everything out. And I found myself, I was on an internal working group that was helping figure out the paycheck protection program for our tenants on the medical office side, and a little bit on our research and innovation side. I was helping, do research on COVID testing, looking at PCR testing versus antigen testing to try to support our seniors housing operators and what they were doing. So it really just like a total pivot of like all hands on deck, figure out how we can kind of like support our operators and tenants however we can, which I think the lesson there is just, at any moment in your career when there's a crisis or, things are unclear, being flexible and just jumping in and doing whatever needs to be done is just a really important lesson. I was able to get back to sustainability after a few months, which was great. And we're still recovering in occupancy on seniors housing. And I do think some lessons that we took from that, we had always had to focus on health and safety, both for our own employees and for the operations within our buildings. But I think the emphasis and focus on that has really stayed with us. And so that's, I guess, maybe a silver lining coming out of the pandemic.
I'll just add, I think that, real estate, like Lauren mentioned, has undergone, a decent sized transition as the least liked asset class in real estate for a long time is retail. Happens to be a lot of what my company owns and operates. And now retail is no longer the least liked real estate sector. It's now office. So good for us. So we didn't do anything different. People like us less than they did before. So that's great. So there's always like opportunity when something else becomes, when there's a disconnection in the marketplace, there's always opportunity. So I would just encourage students that are interested in the real estate sector to know that, like, if there's, a moment of fallout and something feels like it is, you know, a falling knife, there's always some other portion of the market that is rising, you know, simultaneously. So there's always opportunity, you know, in any big shift, there's always opportunity. So just think about it, you know, through that lens. And then the only other comment I'll add just to what everyone else said, I think Whitney mentioned it at the start, was, you know, I think being in the office is really important. I think that it is an opportunity to learn from others, more importantly than anything else. One of the messages we tell senior people at our company is, your job as a senior leader is to mentor young people, and young people, your job is to learn from senior people. And there is just a physical connection that technology cannot bridge right now. Like maybe someday it will, and it does a pretty good job, but it doesn't do a perfect job. So I would encourage undergrads that are currently applying for jobs, you know, whether or not you actually believe it, I would encourage you to say this in interviews. Like, tell people you want to be in the office. Like, people like us that are on this call want to hear you say that. So say it, even if you don't mean it. Because it may matter.
Thank you for that. I can definitely relate, since a lot of jobs are hybrid, so you have the choice to go into the office or not. And while it can be tempting to stay at home, it's really important to remember that these relationships will just grow stronger if you are present and go into the office. So before getting into our last question, I do want to encourage students to send in any questions that you have, as we will have time for that after this one. And for the last one, I was just wondering if you could place yourself in students' shoes right now, what would you do, or any advice that you have? And this can go in no particular order. You can just jump in.
I'll start, since I've been doing the order. The only comment I'd say is, I try to tell undergrads this all the time, and I did not do a good enough job of this when I was, I think, you know, in that stage. But don't worry so much about picking a career path based on the thing that you think you're interested in. So what I mean by that is, like, a lot of times people pick a career path because they'll say, I think I'm interested in healthcare or technology or sports or whatever it may be. I'd say instead, and that could be a fine way of going down a career path, but there's another way of thinking about it, which is, what are the things that you like to do? So I personally am not in love with real estate in the way that, like, some people are. Some people are like, oh, the buildings, and they just deeply fall in love. I really don't care that much. What I care about is, I love negotiating. I love looking at numbers. I love problem solving. I love building relationships. So it's the things that I do that I really like, not the subject matter that I really like. Honestly, I could be doing those things, the negotiating, building relationships, whatever, about different subject matter. Again, maybe it could be healthcare, or I don't know. And I think I'd be pretty fulfilled in my career path. And so I'd encourage students to think about the things that they're really trying to solve for. You know, work-life balance is another component, or the way they spend their time. Do you want to be sitting in front of a computer all day, or do you want to be out traveling? Like, think about the things that you do as opposed to the subject matter. I'd say it's a perspective I didn't have. I've only gotten it later in my career. I don't think it would have changed very much, but I think it could be a useful tool for people that are trying to figure out which direction they want to go.
I'll jump in, keeping the order, I guess, or one of the orders. Yeah, I would echo all that. And I know it doesn't feel like it now, but what you do right out of Northwestern does not determine what you're going to do for the rest of your life. So it feels like such an important decision, but getting experience or going to get a master's degree or law degree or whatever, like, just doing something that will give you breadth and depth of experience, even if it's not exactly what you want to do, or you don't know what you want to do, or you think you know what you want to do. It's a starting point. It's a jumping off point. It's a launch pad. And you know, of course, some people might get lucky and like go into exactly what they want and do that for the rest of their career, but most people won't. And it's okay. It's you know, that experience will still have value for you in figuring out what you want to do and developing skills and relationships that will impact, you know, whatever you end up doing in your career.
I will jump in. Two pieces of advice using my own experience as the example. My father was an accountant, but he also was a part-time real estate broker, which is why I always thought I would work in some kind of real estate capacity. I obtained my real estate license, Illinois State Real Estate License, right out of school. I actually took a class at Kellogg at the school downtown. And that was my first real estate class, took the class. And what I recognized that anybody who I referred to any property in the city would pay me a referral fee because I referred them 20 of my classmates. I could have lived my life literally on those referral payments. So people don't think about that. Northwestern people, we're like, they're doing bigger things. I got my real estate license at 21 and made money almost immediately. It's ridiculous, but it's true. All I had to do was make a call and say, so-and-so's coming over and you get paid. So do that, not going to hurt you. You may never use it again. You'll have it for a couple of years. You may not renew it because it does cost to renew it every year. But it's super easy because you're Northwestern graduates. You'll be able to pass the test and not even study for it. It's easy. So just do it, get it done. The second thing is also against every advice is just have fun, like right after school and, get a job, find a way to make some money, but explore everything. I regret every minute. I think about this today. I wanted to create an all-girl reggae band when I was right out of college. I said, I can play the bass guitar. I want to have an all-girl reggae band. And my cousin said, do it, put an ad in the paper, get it done. My parents were like, are you crazy? What is wrong with you, right? So I didn't do it. So 10 years of working, my dream was to create my company. I did it. And then I regret not doing that all-girl reggae band. I thought I was too old to do all-girl reggae band. So have fun, do something fun, continue to work, continue to explore other options. There's a plan B. You can always go back to business school and go back to law school and work in real estate. Again, you live in real estate today. So you work in the industry, whether you think you do or not. But figure out some other fun things you want to do and do them simultaneously. You're young, you don't have to sleep.
I love that advice. The only thing I'd add too is that I think, it feels like this monumental moment where you graduate and you have to figure out what you're going to do next and where you're going to be in 10, 20 years. And sometimes when you spend the time focusing on kind of where you want to be eventually, you miss the opportunity to learn in the moment and kind of recognize and enjoy what you're doing. And I think it's true at any point in your career. If you're always thinking ahead to the next step, you may not kind of gain the skills at the opportunities right in front of you. So I would just encourage you to take the pressure off. I wish I had thought about that a little more, kind of what I was doing in the moment. Because I think, as we all know, life takes you in different directions you don't expect. I never expected to live in New York City. I never expected to spend my whole career here. And so those things are going to happen naturally. So if you focus on them too much, you'll kind of miss the opportunities that come along the way.
Thank you so much for all of your time and all of your advice. It's very inspiring hearing all of your perspectives. And with that being said, Cassie, would you like to take student questions now?
I would love to. Thanks, Ani. Thanks for moderating. That was great. Hearing, some advice and stories and things like that. And we have student questions flooding in here. So I'll get us started. And of course, students, as we're getting going, feel free to send me a private chat with a question, or you can send in your question to the public chat and I'll call on you. So I'll start with a question from Jack, writing in asking, how many of you started in general finance and consulting? What was your reason to transition into the real estate space? And then can you also share some of the key differentiators between working in real estate and finance and real estate and other areas of finance? And Julia, I see you turned your mic on, so let's go with you to start.
Yeah, sure. So I think that the reason to move was more into real estate was, I guess I could have seen my career going kind of one of two directions. It could have done more like trading focused, which is I did that for a while. And then I had this opportunity when PIMCO launched some of its alternative vehicles to focus more on real estate. And I really just kind of pursued something that I can't remember who said it on the panel, but maybe it was Lauren a minute ago, just exploring kind of other avenues when I already thought my career was kind of established on a certain path. There was a moment where I said, well, maybe this path is open to doing something that is tangentially related to what I've done before, but that otherwise I wouldn't have the opportunity at this stage of my career to go make that sort of move. And I did, and really enjoyed it. There was a side of it that it was more of a deep dive into, individual projects as opposed to kind of more surface level work. And so I enjoyed that more. And so I ended up liking it a lot. I'd say there's no real wrong answer as far as kind of which direction, you're interested in going. It's just like something I said before about, figuring out the things that you like to do with your time and with your day. And so I thought that I enjoyed kind of the fast-paced nature of being at a large, financial organization where you're digesting a lot of things that are being thrown at you constantly. And even if you're on the investment banking side, your projects roll off pretty fast, typically. Sometimes they don't, but typically they do. But being on the, on the investment side, when you buy something, you own it. So you tend to be much more focused on it for a longer period of time. And so it's a question of, do you like the pace of things rolling off faster, or do you like the pace of really understanding deeply the intricacies of the thing that you're working on? So I would say maybe that's the reason why I kind of made the move. Now, why real estate specifically? Again, it was just kind of the opportunities that popped up when they popped up, because I'd say the same argument would hold true for if you did traditional corporate private equity, if you moved into venture capital, if you did those types of things, the same argument would hold. So it was just a fact, again, a function of the career path that I was on and where I ended up. Hopefully I answered part of that question.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And Jack, of course, as alumni are answering this one, feel free to send in any follow-up questions. But I know we had some other folks who started out in different spaces and transition. Kelly, Lauren, do either of you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, so I figured out I wanted to try real estate when I was in business school. I went to Wharton for my MBA after doing management consulting at Deloitte. And, I kind of tested the waters. I went to some consumer products meetings, and people were super passionate about bleach. I'm like, not really for me. So I kind of honed in on real estate and ended up majoring in real estate and an internship in real estate. I worked at a real estate private equity fund out of Wharton, and then ended up at Ventas. But yeah, kind of to Julio's point, I think it's more enjoying the types of things that you're doing. It's not so much, I do have somewhat of a passion for real estate in particular, and that's morphed into sustainability, which is, I think, my true passion. And I could see myself doing sustainability, not within real estate necessarily. And again, it's the things that I enjoy doing in the day-to-day of, working on all sorts of different types of projects and, working with different types of people all across our business that I really enjoy. It's not so much specific to an industry per se.
Oh, that's really helpful and things. And Lauren, I saw you shake your head. If you want to add anything, feel free.
Nope, I think they covered it all.
Great, thanks. And Vince, another student was writing in, given everyone's different backgrounds and varying paths into real estate, how would you recommend navigating career changes and finding things you're interested in while you're already working at a job? So maybe for these students who are going to start out in a space in the next year or two, how can they continue to explore when they're in a job? And maybe we can start with Whitney, if that's okay with you. We can, yeah.
I think the answer is that there's always opportunities, right? I've worked at the same place my entire career, but you're constantly exposed to different opportunities through whether it's at a conference, whether it's just reading the news, whether it's working alongside other people in other industries. And there's always that opportunity. And I think even when you're in one piece of your career, people always value knowledge about something else. So if something interests you, learn about it, it can kind of come into the career you're in and kind of also help you form connections and networking to get to a different place as well. But I think I know it seems daunting to, when you're in one place, try to think about moving to another place, whether it's another peer firm or whether it's another industry. But I think a lot of that happens naturally as well.
And I'll add, you're so young. that, you know, if you're unhappy in a particular place or in a particular role, you'll know when it's time to start looking around at other opportunities. Maybe that means you go back to school. Maybe that means you start asking friends what they're doing and what they like and looking and researching other companies. But, you know, when you have to pivot, I think this whole season we've been in shows that you have to pivot, get it done, look around, don't stay someplace you're not happy. Always, if you're not growing, if you're not learning more, certainly take the opportunity to move on.
Yeah, absolutely. Julio, Kelly, anything to add on this one? Awesome. This is great. Thank you. And Sheena just wrote in, and I'm wondering if we can all think back a few years. What was the best advice you received early on in your career? I love the perspective you all have now, and have shared some really fun insights, given, you know, your experience. What did you hear back when you were, you know, just starting out that helped you? I'll give you a second to think, but then I'll call someone.
I think the best advice I got was just to ask a lot of questions, and that not to apologize for not knowing things. I think a lot of times people go into these careers and feel overwhelmed that they don't know what's going on or the subject matter, but the expectation from senior people is that people who come into these careers know very little about it. And so what they're really looking for is people who want to learn, who want to ask questions. And so somebody once, when I was starting out, was saying, nobody wants somebody who thinks they know everyone, but nobody wants somebody either who isn't confident enough to ask questions. And I think that was really impactful on me.
I think mine was I think it was Kelly that said it, but if not, I'm going to give her credit for it anyway. I think the comment around, you know, you feel like every decision, like especially early on, feels like it's the most monumental, you know, most important decision. Like this first job that I take is going to define my entire career. And I think I heard a version of it early on in my career that was, over the course of an entire career, you may end up having like 3 or 4 different mini careers. And even for someone like Whitney, if Whitney stays her entire career at Simpson Thacher, like you could still have 3 or 4 careers, right? You have the associate career, you could have your early partnership career, you could have running a department, and then, you know, and then who knows what else so you can have all these different mini careers. So it's like, you're not going to really make a misstep, right? As long as you're continuing, like Lauren said it too, like you're learning every step of the way and you're pushing yourself to continue to grow, you'll kind of figure it out. And I will be the first to admit, I threw that advice right in the trash and said, no way, this decision is the most important thing. And I stressed out over it and was like super angry about it and whatever. And now looking back, it was like, those decisions didn't matter, but it's hard to have that perspective. I will definitely admit that.
Yeah, that's great, Julio. And Kelly or Lauren, do you have any little insights from back in the day?
My memory is not that good. I would echo what Julio and Whitney said, though. Definitely asking questions. Like I learned a lot from asking a lot of probably dumb questions. And I like it when I see my colleagues asking questions. It shows me they're paying attention and care, and it's a great way to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lauren, any insights?
All I have to say is I should have been in a reggae band right now.
Definitely true.
Love it. This is great. I know we have just a few more minutes of your time, so I want to close out our session with just one more question around networking. And Becky had sent in a question about how to best start to network with people in senior positions or with titles that our students may feel intimidated by. And I'm kind of wondering if I can also, in that question, ask you all, you know, what can students, what you know, you had mentioned offering the alumni something. What can students offer you? Like, what is a good example of something, you know, they can offer a senior person at a company when they reach out to network and connect with you all?
Yeah, I'll start. I'll kick this one off. So there've been a few instances, as I'm sure all of us have had, where people have reached out with just like a generic wanting to connect. And it to me, I responded that feeling like kind of overwhelmed by it. I'm like, I don't know how to respond to you. Like, I love the idea of trying to help someone, but if you don't have an ask, if there's nothing that I can, if it's just you want to take up my time to talk about the industry generically, like just generally and better understand it, like that's not a great use of my time. So I'm only going to have so much of that to give, and I'm busy. And at this stage of my life, I have kids, and so my personal time is also busy. And so, I think that the best thing to do is to try to approach it from a perspective of, hey, I'm interested in the industry. I see you guys have job postings. I'd really love to connect with someone in this part of your company and this part of your company. And then I'm happy to connect them to people that are more their peer set and have the initial conversation with them. And I'm of course happy to follow up at some point down the road if there's specific questions to answer. But the open-endedness of let's just connect is really hard for me to respond to. And will probably lead to a more dismissive response from me. Again, just speaking candidly, like because I just don't know how to respond to it. So it's not out of, I don't want to help. It's that I don't know that, is this going to be an hour of my time that I don't have to give for something that I don't know what results it's going to yield. So I'd say the more specific the ask, I think the better, the more that it's around, hey, I'm interested in a job opportunity. Would love to talk to you a little bit more about the company and about the industry. I frankly don't know much about real estate. Would love to learn a little bit more. And then in the conversation saying, who can I talk to at your organization that maybe would be a good person to better understand what they do day to day? And then I feel like it's an ask. I'm making a networking connection. I'm passing them off to someone else like that. That to me is like a cleaner progression.
I really like that insight, Julio, of all the advice you shared, but specifically asking you to connect them with someone who, maybe a little bit more early on in their career, more of that peer connection, like you mentioned, could be less intimidating too for that student to connect with that individual who may or may not be closer to hiring too, which is great. Whitney, did you have something to add too?
Going to add that sometimes circumventing that middle step too is really effective. Like I think there's this assumption that the senior people at real estate industry make all the decisions, and while ultimately there is a hierarchy and stuff, if some more junior person comes in and say, hey, I met and connected with this person, I really think they'd be great, so sometimes reaching out to people who are not necessarily at the senior level but maybe at a more junior level, talking to them about the day-to-day, what do you do, what do you like about it, what do you don't, it'll help you give you advice as to what you might expect if you work at a place. But a lot of times that feedback of people that they like also ends up people who are hired. So I would just encourage that as well.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Whitney. And Lauren and Kelly, I'll give it to you if you have any other last words for advice.
I would say certainly use this Wildcat platform to make the connections. Luckily, there's something like this available to you all as undergraduates. That was not the case when I was an undergraduate. There had a lot more sort of underground level sort of networking going on and helping. But I think that if a young Wildcat calls me, I'm going to pay attention probably more than someone else. So just because we're all very busy, and we are very busy, heads of companies are busy, vice presidents of companies are busy, and they have their own social lives. Don't let that deter you. Not everyone's going to be as busy, and someone's going to take your call the minute you say you're at Northwestern right now. So think about that and make the call, but make the ask, like Leo said, and be specific and just keep going. Just keep trying, see who's available, and that opportunity will come.
Yeah, I totally agree with all that. And would just add to that industry groups are a great way to network and getting on a committee or, just getting involved, going to panels, helping organize events is a great way to network and also help people because you can help take some workload off someone that's trying to organize something or anything like that. So I've learned a lot and done a lot of networking through industry groups.
This is great. You all provided so many great insights and tangible advice and for our students today. And I would love to invite our students to join me in thanking our alumni speakers. Feel free to send in a chat to thank them for being here with us. And I'd also love for our students, consider sending in one of your key takeaways from today's session. There were so many good tidbits that our alumni shared. Feel free to send in some of those takeaways for our alumni to kind of check out as I'm saying our closing notes. So Alumni, of course, thank you all so much for spending this hour with us throughout your busy work days. Students, thank you for joining us for the call. Be on the lookout for an email from my colleague Joseph, who's going to send a follow-up email with our alumni's LinkedIn profiles to connect with them there. And also for your $20 Grubhub credit. Since we normally buy students lunch, we're doing that virtually with Grubhub credits through the Zoom. So be on the lookout for that follow-up. And thank you all so much again for being here with us today. Have a great rest of your day and go Cats. All right, I'm going to leave this on so I can read through